I was so close to all that, and to see that thing dismantled and corrupted in an area that really matters. I just hope that Tulsi Gabbard, when she comes in, that she can repair this against all the odds. I've briefed her in the past when she was a member of the House. She is super smart.
Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm again joined by Ray McGovern. Ray was an analyst for the CIA for 27 years, being, among other things, responsible for preparing the president's daily brief. He's now part of the activist group Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and today we want to discuss the role of intelligence and presidential decisions, of which, honestly, we have seen a lot one way or another in the last 2 weeks of the Trump presidency. Ray, welcome.
Thank you, Pascal. Thank you for having me.
Very glad to have you with me because you are one of the people who actually was responsible to brief the president on things that's happening. And we've seen so many executive orders of the president, the new president, and Donald J. Trump, that I'm really wondering on what basis is he taking decisions now? Because his pick for the intelligence organizations is not yet confirmed. Tulsi Gabbard is not yet confirmed. At the moment, who is briefing the president on what's happening in the world?
John Radcliffe has been confirmed, and he's the new director of the CIA. Organizationally, he, at least notionally, reports to the director of national intelligence, who it looks very much like it will be Tulsi Gabbard. She emerged from committee 9-8 on a straight party vote. But that means probably that the full Senate will confirm her as the next director of national intelligence. That is of supreme importance because it is she, that is, the director of national intelligence, who has purview over all very important analytical products, including, first and foremost, the president's daily brief. Now, as you mentioned, I had a role in the PDB. Actually, I started preparing it. I wasn't alone, of course. There was a small group for Nixon and then for Ford. And then a very curious thing happened with respect to Reagan. With Nixon and Ford, we pretty much took great care to make sure that we wrote what we intended to say. But then we had to send it down to this fellow named Henry Kissinger. And of course, Henry Kissinger knew everything about everything. And so word came back that he used to sort of tear out this article, tear out this one, or make notes. These people don't know what they're talking about. Now, let me tell you about it. So the word is we never got to see the president, okay? Never. We did all this work. We never got to brief him, okay? Until Reagan came in. Now, a couple of my supervisors at the time, I was relatively junior, when they heard that Ronald Reagan had been won the nomination, they said, wow, he doesn't know much about foreign policy. Let's go out and brief him with the president's daily brief. So we all asked Admiral Turner, who was our head of the CIA at the time. He said, that's a great idea. Of course you should do that. Okay. And then we asked the president. He said, yeah, the current president. Yeah. So we went out there. Now, when I say we, it was two of my former buddies. Okay. So they go to the Pacific Palisades, show up in the morning at 7:15 and meet the Secret Service. Secret Service, who are you? CIA, morning briefing for the president. Well, we don't have any word about this. What's going on here? Goes, look here, CIA. And then just by happenstance, Reagan comes down in his bathrobe and pajamas to have some breakfast. Said, what's going on out there? CIA briefing, sir. Oh, okay, come on in. That was it. That was it. He loved it. We had two pretty senior people who had been around a while and could tell the truth and knew how to brief people. Reagan loved it. They alternated one week, another week. And we were in the staff supporting them, of course. Long story short, they get to Washington, Reagan is inaugurated, and George H.W. Bush, his vice president, who really knew about all this and wanted to be briefed himself, he says, uh, now that you're president, Mr. President, how would you like to handle the president's daily brief? I sort of would like to see it too. And they're probably Secretary of State, Secretary, they probably should see it too. So what time do you want to be briefed? And Ronald Reagan says, um, those early mornings were pretty rigorous. So I'll tell you what, why don't you guys get the personal one-on-one briefings and then come see me at 11:30. I'll be ready to go then. And you can tell me what to think, what they said. Well, that's the way it went down. Okay. So on any given day, I worked in a team of two. On any given morning, 7:30, 8:30, 9, I would brief some assortment of the Vice President, Bush, the Secretary of State, mostly Schultz, Secretary of Defense, Weinberger, the Vice President I mentioned, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, we added later with the President's approval, of course, and the Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, one-on-one. It was the most heady. It was the halcyon day for me as an experienced PDB briefer to be trusted to go down there and brief these people one-on-one, answer their questions to the extent I could, and find the answers to the extent I couldn't and get them right back to these people. It was an incredible cog in the intelligence process. This is probably some of your audience need to be refreshed that the intelligence process starts with collection requirements. What does the president need to know? Okay. And then they're translated to collectors to collect this information. And then if it's fancy stuff, technological stuff, they need to be processed. Okay. Or if it's substantive stuff, it needs to be analyzed. And then it needs to be disseminated to policymakers. This was the first time in the history of the president's daily brief that it was disseminated to the policymakers one-on-one, 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning by one experienced analyst. And I happened to have the privilege of doing that for 4 years during the first term of Ronald Reagan. It was terrific. Okay. Now, what happened? Well, by and by, it became, well, there was a fellow who actually worked for me in the early 70s. His name, you may know it, is Robert M. Gates. Okay. And he was smart enough. Oh, he's very smart. But he was so ambitious that he was a, you know, he was a problem in my branch. And so I pointed that out to him in his fitness report. He didn't really like that. Anyhow, long story short, he gets sent down to the White House to work for Brzezinski. Casey is down there. And when the October surprise, when Jimmy Carter couldn't get the hostages out, we know now from a new book out, don't have it in front of me, Craig Unger is the name of the author, that Gates and Casey played a role in postponing the decision by the Iranians releasing the hostages until after Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. So there's a fellow who's not a really intelligence officer, he's an operator. And when he sensed that Mr. Casey thought that the Russians were behind every untoward thing in the world, like Nicaragua or Angola or whatever, okay, he said, yes, sir, Mr. Casey. And long story short, he brought up a retinue of people who are not very accomplished substantively, but they certainly knew how to salute. Gates himself was a windsock, and they became windsocks too. Witness the fact that on December the 21st, 2002, just 3 months before the invasion of Iraq, George Tenet, a direct descendant from Bobby Gates as head of the CIA, George Tenet and John McLaughlin, one of his deputy, briefed Bush and Cheney, the younger Bush, about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Okay. And their briefing was not factual, but it was also not very persuasive in saying they were there, that there was the weapons of mass destruction. So Cheney says, "Is that all you got?" and and McLaughlin's face turns red because he was briefing it, but Tenet jumps off the couch and he says, "Mr. President, it's a slam dunk. It's a slam dunk." Now, for those of you who don't know basketball, that's when you're a really big guy, and you're this basketball right there. Slam dunk. Okay. How do we know this? Condoleezza Rice, the national security aide, who was there, told the New York Times, "It's not my fault. George Tenet jumped off the couch and said, slam dunk." Okay. Now, I can go a little further on it. Well, maybe I will before I leave the slam dunk. The head of national intelligence under Obama and Biden, his name was James Clapper. When there was a Syrian, there was a sarin attack, poison gas in Syria, and everyone and his brother was saying the Syrians did it, Bashar al-Assad did it, it was terrible, we have to make war on Syria. Clapper comes into the White House unannounced and asked to speak to the president and does. And he said, "Now, Mr. President, John Kerry is a wonderful fellow, and he knew how to drive those boats up there, up the Mekong, and brave man, but he doesn't know much about intelligence." He says, actually, he said 35 times just 2 days ago that Bashar al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad did this thing outside of Damascus, the sarin attack. I don't know how to say this, Mr. President, but well, let me put it this way. It's not a slam dunk. It's not a slam dunk. How do I know that? Obama told his unofficial biographer, Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic, the year before Obama went into the Western sunset. So these things are consequential. Let me go back to the PDB. Who runs the PDB now? The Director of National Intelligence. So it was Clapper, okay? And then it became this Avril Haines with no background in intelligence at all. She was a lawyer, and she was scooped up by John Brennan, head of the CIA, because he loved what she could do with the laws and the regulations. So he was very happy to have her as his deputy, for a couple of months until John Brennan sent some of his thugs in to access the Senate Intelligence Committee computers. See, they were investigating torture. And John Brennan was deeply involved in all that. He wanted to know what the Senate Intelligence Committee had as they put together their report. So they hacked into the Senate committee computers. Why do I mention this? Well, Avril Haines all of a sudden was transferred from the CIA to the National Security Council. And they needed somebody to investigate this rather untoward event where one branch of the government is hacking into the. And so they picked Avril Haines. Okay, she did a wonderful job. She said, "Oh no, just a big mistake. Nobody, no, don't hold. This was, forget about it. Forget about it." So this is the kind of cluck that ends up as the head of national intelligence under Biden. Now, why I mention that? Because if you look at Iraq, the invasion of Ukraine happened at the end of February 2022. Okay. Now, at the end of 2022, Avril Haines said publicly, and I'm sure she told the president herself, "Look, good news. Russians are running out of ammunition. They have no indigenous capability to produce the ammunition that they're leaving helter-skelter on the field before the Ukrainian forces. So take heart. This looks really good. And when the spring offensive comes with the Ukrainian forces, well, we will have won." And sure enough, in July, the person who reports to her, William Burns, head of the CIA, told the president, actually told the press on the 2nd of July, Putin has already lost in Ukraine. His army has been demonstrated to be ineffectual for the whole world to see. That was the 2nd of July. Now, 8 days later, Biden in Helsinki repeats those words. Putin has already lost in Ukraine. Don't worry about it. So that was what, a year and a half ago. Okay, July. Earlier, that's 2 years ago with April. That's the kind of intelligence, if you can call it intelligence, that was given to the president. Obviously, they wanted to please the president. They wanted to tell him what he wanted to hear. Last thing on this. Now, it was so bizarre that the head of the CIA would tell the president on the second, well, tell everybody on the second, it was in the Washington Post, 2nd of July, 2023, that Putin had lost. Then I tried to figure out, well, where did he get that? And I found out something really interesting. He had just been in Kiev, and he had just been wined and dined by Zelensky and all those folks. And so it's not a stretch to say, well, obviously, Zelensky and his generals said to Bill Burns, the head of the CIA, don't worry about it. We got this made. We've got this spring now summer offensive. Everything's going to be fine. You tell the president Putin has already lost. My God, that's the only explanation I can think of. I can't conceive of, however corrupt the analysts have become at the CIA, anybody in the CIA telling the director of the CIA that Putin had already lost in July of 2023, but he was told by somebody, and he's a pretty impressionable guy. He's probably saying, well, that's what Zelensky said. Well, things are looking up. We're going to win. And besides, Putin has already lost. I'm sorry to go on at this length, but it's a very, I was so close to all that. And to see that thing dismantled and corrupted in an area that really matters. I just hope that Tulsi Gabbard, when she comes in, that she can repair this against all the odds. I've briefed her in the past when she was a member of the House. She is super smart. She doesn't suffer fools gladly. She listens, she asks questions. So I have some hope that she might be very good on places like Ukraine and brief the president on the realities of the ground. Namely, Mr. President, your poker hand has a pair of deuces. Putin has four aces. That's the hand you've been dealt by the previous administration and by Putin. You could deal, but realize that's the situation. That's the lay of the land on the ground. So maybe I'll stop here and catch my breath.
The I don't want to stop you because I really wonder how you make sense of this. Because we have this very peculiar problem that even if you are close to the whole apparatus, uh, like you and observers, we are constantly guessing how decisions are made in Washington because there's several factors playing, right? So does the guy, let's say Biden, did the guy actually have the mental capacity to take decisions? First question. If whether yes or no, does he make these decisions himself, or is he basically listening to Jake Sullivan and maybe Tony Blinken, who are constantly around him? Then the next question then is like, do these people have access to information that is accurate and factual about what's happening on the ground, or are they surrounded by windbags who tell them what they want to hear, what they think will please them, which will be a distorted version of reality? The whole thing about Russia is losing was a strange, not a strange, it was just a wrong idea. It was want to believe. They wanted reality to be like that. Then they presented reality as that. Then and it seems to me that then some people started taking decisions based upon this faulty assessment. And especially in the media, the narrative was all about this one. And that yet leaves out the whole issue that even if the Russians had been losing, that would have been even more dangerous because of the nuclear weapons. But let's leave that whole complex aside. So just the knowledge management. And if I listen to you, it seems to me that Presidential Daily Brief, the PDB, was an entire kind of institution inside the CIA, and it was kind of a way of trying to give the president the most accurate information on what's actually going on possible, I suppose. And then it degenerated into giving the president what he wants to hear in order to be in his good graces. Is that about
Mhm.
correct?
Well, Pascal, it's pretty simple. Corrupt people can corrupt the whole organization in a generation. Uh, when William Casey came in as director, I was still there, of course. He was a Cold Warrior par excellence. He had run spies in World War II. He knew that spies had all the information. He was dismissive of our capacity of media analysis, reading what the Russians had said one day and comparing it to what they said the next day, which, believe it or not, was a very lucrative uh, discipline if you know how to do it right, if you were around for a while. So when he came in, and his prejudices were that the Russians were trying to take over the whole world. And of course, this was before Russia fell apart. So I guess it's even more defensible than this later crowd. But he enlisted he enlisted Bobby Gates to be head of analysis. Okay. Now, when you're head of analysis and you say to everyone, including the president, the Russians will never give up, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union will never give up power without a fight. It will be a violent revolution, but oh, it's not going to happen. Not going to happen. You understand that, Mr. President? Well, that was their attitude. Now, in recruiting the head of the Soviet Affairs Division, who are you going to pick to do that? Somebody who knows that's not so? No. You pick a toady like John McLaughlin. Does he know about Russia? No, but he's a quick learner. He'll learn, he'll learn what he's supposed to say. So he's a really good example. And as I said before, he bubbled up to be the deputy director of the CIA. So when you pick these people, you kind of make it very easy to have malleable managers that will in turn lean on their analysts and say, well, Mr. Casey won't like to hear that. Oh, Mr. Gates won't, well, we're not going to send that forward. And after a generation, you have a totally corrupt organization. And I'm talking specifically about the manufactured intelligence that was used by Bush and Cheney to justify a war of aggression against another country that posed no threat to us at all. So it's a complicated thing, but not on the face of it. On the face of it, people do matter. You put either ideologically deformed people, or you put careerists in place, and that's what you get. Now, when I say ideologically misinformed people, now there's a difference that I see between Biden in his first 2 years and Biden when he was less compos mentis in his last 2 years. Uh, but it's kind of a distinction without a difference because it's all informed by this ideology that we are the exceptional country of the world. We are, in fact, the indispensable country in the world, okay? And the president has said that explicitly, that is President Biden. Now, there was a woman who was Secretary of State she was also representative at the UN. Her name was Madeleine Albright. She came from an immigrant family in Czechoslovakia. And she was the one that wanted Colin Powell to tell his troops to get into Serbia. And, what do you have an army for if you can't use it, this kind of thing. Now, she coined the word indispensable and exceptional. We are the exceptional country of the world, and we have to stop. We have to keep being that. And how does that translate into real facts? Well, as you may recall, after she stopped being Secretary of State, she gave an interview. It was a time at which Iraq was really, really hurt by sanctions, economic sanctions of all manner of things. And the UN figures had come up with 500,000 Iraqi children under the age of 5 who had perished over the skein of years because of the sanctions. Now, Leslie Stahl, who used to be, I think she's still around, she used to be a crackerjack reporter, right? So she's talking to Madeleine Albright, and she says, now, uh, Madam Secretary, 500,000 children under the age of 5, do you think it's worth it? And without batting an eye, Madeleine, oh, yes, it's worth it. We think it's worth it. Okay. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
What kind of
It's,
dementia? I mean, how about Gazan children? Not worth it? So, what I'm saying here is that Biden, knowing all this, quoted Madeleine Albright in speech after speech, saying, remember what Madeleine Albright said, we're the exceptional, indispensable country of the world, so we can do what we want, right? He even said it in private living rooms. And I know that for a fact, some friends up in Maine who heard him say, so we believe that kind of stuff, okay? And then when 60 Minutes asked him 2 years ago, Mr. President, you have Ukraine, you have China, actually you have the Middle East. Do you think that you could handle two conflicts at the same time? And I'll never forget, he said, please, we're the United States of America, the most powerful country in the history of the world, in the history of the world. So I'm not big on ideology. I mean, I don't even call that ideology. That's just misguided elitism. Okay, so that was driving to Biden, and then of course you got these clucks in there, Blinken and Sullivan, who didn't know which end was up. They didn't go. They did go to the right schools, and they had well polished shoes, but they didn't know diddly about war or about anything else, and especially about tectonic shifts like the one that has China and Russia joined at the hip now, largely because of their misfeasance and their malfeasance.
but this is so important, and we know about this neocon ideology, right? And we kind of lump it all together under the label neocon in order to have a box to put it in. But I
Mm.
mean, yeah, you would need to do them more justice in order to be accurate. But the point is that there is ideology on the one hand, or something that people adhere to, let's say a mental framework that they want to affirm, and then on the other hand, there's intelligence or facts on the ground, right? There should be facts on the
Right.
ground, or as John Mearsheimer calls it, facts of life. And these facts of life should be separated from what you would like to be true in order then to take rational decisions. Because the other side, the Russians and the Chinese, they will expect this information to be processed by the decision makers in the United States and then react to that, and they will react again to this one. This is a very intricate global system, right, of action and reaction. Now, the Daily Brief, or the intelligence, it seems to me, has this big problem that it is caught up in having to adhere to the current version of reality or of belief that the president is holding, right? Be it a neocon president, or be it like now Donald Trump, which is why the question is, will Tulsi Gabbard and will the people running the Daily Brief serve the president even the things he doesn't want to hear? Will they serve him the realities on the ground, let's say, about what it means to have 1.8 million Palestinians in Gaza and what it would mean to just remove them? Or will they serve to him the narrative that, let's say, Mr. Netanyahu would like him to believe, as in, yeah, this is no problem, just send in the troops because greatest country on earth, right? You can do whatever you want, which leads then to horrible outcomes. Which one is it? Is Washington still capable of actually serving the decision makers like facts of life?
Well, there is a setup. There is an establishment and an organization that allows the president to be told the truth. Harry Truman, who set up this organization in 1947, said what he wanted was what did he call it? Untainted intelligence. Okay, he wanted to hear the straight scoop. Now, how did he indicate that? Well, he said, I want my own CIA responsive to me, not to the Secretary of State, not to the Secretary of Defense. I control their careers. They report to me and they tell me things without fear or favor. Whoa, that's why I joined the CIA in 1963. I read these books and man, and in graduate school, I studied about the new National Security Council setup, new Department of Defense, the CIA, brand new. Now it can work. I've seen it work. Let me just give you one example. And this is a very telling one, and it's a very current one. Iran. Everybody hated Iran. Oh, wow. Well, because of the hostages, you know. Nobody thought back that in 1953, we overturned the first freely elected prime minister of Iran in 4 millennia. That's, all right. So we were responsible for a lot of this hatred. And then the Shah that we put in was just as bad. His Gestapo was just as bad as the one in Germany. Okay. Then he got sick. Okay. And the Iranians are afraid, oh my God, where is he? Oh, he's going to Washington. Oh, the embassy in Tehran is going to run another coup, for God's sake. Now, I don't defend going into embassies and taking hostages, but that's what they did, right? And that, of course, soured relations forever. Um, Ayatollah Khomeini was using the most sophisticated technology available at the time. It was called a tape recorder, a cassette tape. And his pronouncements from minarets in France were being carried into Iran. And you know the rest of the story. There was a revolution there, and Iran became pretty much an independent entity, free of Russian influence as well as free as American. Now, they became a threat. A threat to whom? To us? No. A threat to whom? Well, to Israel. Why? Because they don't know what they don't like what the Israelis are doing to other Muslim people. You know, they're Shia, Sunni. Well, it doesn't matter. They don't really like it, and so Netanyahu is really afraid of these guys. So what's he say? Oh, they're building a nuclear weapon. Now, back in 2000, there was this routine where every 3 or 4 years, the national intelligence estimates, this is a product of all the agencies, would say, how soon can Iran get a nuclear weapon? And in these are general figures, 1998, it was about 5 years they can get a nuclear weapon. And in 2002, we think it'll be about 5 years, okay? And then in 2005, well, they're close to it, but everything about 5 years, they were pulling these judgments out of thin air, okay? Then Iraq happened, and everyone could see what trouble you could get in if you rely on politicized, corrupt intelligence officers. And it was very clear that Bush and Cheney had Iran in its sights, pretty much said so. The neocons were saying, well, all right, we'll do Baghdad, but real men go to Tehran. God, they were saying that, right? So somebody with their head screwed on right said, oh my God, we have to prevent what happened in Iraq from happening in Iran. That would be still worse. So let's get an estimate on how far along. Let's get an honest estimate. Let's bring in new people and get an estimate on how close Iran is to getting a nuclear weapon. And they looked all around for an honest manager of estimates, and they couldn't find any. Witness what I told you before. But they did find one fellow. He was head of State Department intelligence. His name was Tom Finger. He now teaches out at Stanford. He had taken copious footnotes to previous estimates on Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, that kind of stuff. So they said, Tom, would you come in and do an estimate on Iran? And I heard this from talking to Tom. He said, my God, no, I'm not part of it. That's enough. I had all that stuff. No, Tom, listen, you got to do it. We can't find anybody else. You could take your own people, your honest people from the State Department. We'll give you a whole year to do it. You can do it sequestered, and we'll have Congress request it. That way, when you're done, whatever you come out, Congress will release it, so it won't be a secret. So Tom tells me that he reluctantly agreed. He assembled some really good people. They worked for a year. They had good fortune of getting some really valuable intelligence collected in the middle of their analysis. And they came to the conclusion, which Congress released in November of 2007, that Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and has not resumed work on a nuclear weapon. This said with considerable confidence by all 16 intelligence agencies at the time. Wow. Now, I know a lot about national intelligence estimates. I joined in 63, and there were only a few before then. I know pretty much what happened since. This is the only time I can say, Pascal, that a national intelligence estimate played a huge role in preventing a war as Bush and Cheney left the area in 2008. Okay. They were ready. Don't believe me. Look at what Bush wrote in his own memoir. He said this estimate was an eye-popping estimate. It deprived me of the military option. Quotes. And here's another quote. Well, how could I authorize a strike by U.S. military on nuclear facilities in Iran if the intelligence community says that Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon? Bummer. He didn't say bummer, but it's so transparent. So what I'm saying here is that you can get good people in. I don't know if there are any left, frankly, but you can get them in from the outside. You mentioned John Mearsheimer. Now, 11 years ago, he wrote a prominent article in Foreign Affairs, and he said the conflict in Ukraine is the fault of the West. Now, he could never get anything published in Foreign Affairs that said that now, but he did say it. And he said if the U.S. continues to try to get Ukraine in NATO, Ukraine will be destroyed. There'll be nothing left of it because the Russians will have to come in. Now, at a public meeting a year and a half ago, it was a Zoom meeting, but I had a chance to ask John Mearsheimer, John, you're in Washington now. He was there in person. Uh, has anyone contacted you? Anyone from Congress or the intelligence agencies or State Department? You were right way back then. You've been right along. Has anybody reached out to consult with you? And John smiled. I didn't know the answer. This isn't that I put up. He said, Ray, it never happened. Never has anyone asked me for my take on it. Now, Mearsheimer is the dean of the realistic school of international relations. That's the vineyard in which I worked for 27 years. I didn't know it was called that. I thought that was the only school. Apparently, there are others, ideological or liberal or something, but that's reality. So that shows not only how inbred people are, but how afraid they are to get solid advice, which might turn out to be what the president or his chief advisors don't want to hear.